We had the very famous Ennis Watley to Michael Jordan alley-oop with the "Holy Toledo, here it comes, Mr. Jordan is right."
You know what I'm going to do? In always every episode, I want you to do an impression of whoever the commentators are. So you've done very well with Jim Brinson, who is actually more Dick Enberg, and you've done a great one today. So good job, mate. How high did Jordan get up? His hands almost seemed to be equal with the top of the square, the painted square on the backboard. It was ridiculous.
I always like to say that Michael got to play with me for a year at North Carolina. I think it really helped him.
Spectacular player from the beginning.
You can see right away Jordan was going to be a big-time scorer.
And showed what an impact he was going to have on the league.
This is NB85, celebrating the 30-year anniversary of Michael Jordan's rookie season in the NBA. And now, your hosts, Adam Ryan and Aaron Steen.
Welcome back to the show, Aaron. This is episode 8 of our NB85 series. How are you, mate?
About as good as every other time that you've asked me how I've been going for the first 7 episodes.
Very matter of fact. Pleased to hear that. Welcome back to our regular listeners, and thanks again for your continued support. If you're new to the show, thank you very much for joining us. Feel free as well to interact with the show. Let us know things you'd like us to chat about in this 1985 NBA season. Obviously, we're open to all kinds of suggestions, and plenty of great things happen throughout the season, and we'll be touching on a majority of those as we progress through all the future episodes of this series, mate. How can people get in touch with you, Aaron? My Twitter handle is @InAllAnnis.
I can be reached on @Steeny, STEHNY, and Adam, we both get a real kick out of interaction from anyone who's fortunate enough to listen to the podcast. So feel free to hit us up.
Yep, and thank you very much if you are one of those great listeners who's taken the time to actually let us know how much you're enjoying the series. And I really do appreciate the fact that a lot of you are actually using hashtag NB85.
Very cool.
In any of the tweets or Facebook messages. So thanks again for that. Mate, just before we get into the episode itself, an incredible photo of Michael Jordan from the 1984-85 preseason, which we detailed extensively in episode 5 of this series, has come to light. It's a stunning photo, and it actually led to a phone call between us in which we were both giddy as a schoolgirl.
Almost giddy up as a schoolgirl.
You rang me on the phone and said, "Have you seen what I just mentioned on Facebook? I just tagged you." And then I said, no, what is it? And then I tried to be silly and you said, focus. And then from there, what happened, mate?
The first comment that I put on the photo on Facebook was, "Holy crap, do all of you know how rare this photo is?" The Facebook account is called Michael Jordan Mexico, and while the account only has 400 or 500 likes, some of the photos that the admins of this page have posted on it are just absolutely amazing. And in NB85 episode number 5, we spoke about the Bulls preseason games, and one of them was at East Washington High School in Indiana, the Bulls and the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, this photo is from that game, and it's just an incredible photo. It's got Jordan standing in the middle of it in his white home uniform. The other Bulls are standing around him in what I think are the warm-ups that were used back in the early 80s or even during the other 70s, because I've seen them before, but they weren't the ones that they wore in the 85 season. In the background of the shot is quite simply a small high school gymnasium crowd.
Oh, it's phenomenal. It is just such a great photo, and you can see some of the Bulls players sitting down getting some instructions from Kevin Lockery, but Jordan's front and centre in the photo. Just an absolutely iconic photo. I'm probably going a little bit over. No, I'm not going over the top. It's a fantastic photo. Incredible stuff. And it even has the name of the photographer down the bottom, Armando Gomez. And I've since tracked Mr. Gomez down, stalker style. And I'm hoping to get in touch with him to see if he'd be willing to chat on a future episode of NB85. It's that good of a photo that we need to speak to him, mate.
Content from this preseason is rare as hen's teeth, and I'm talking about text content is rare as hen's teeth. So to have a photograph of one of those games pop up out of nowhere, I almost fell over when I saw it.
NBA News Notes and Quotes, October 26th through November 9th, 1984.
Whilst our focus is primarily on the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan in his rookie season, which is 30 years ago this season as we record, we are going to be chatting about numerous NBA issues and things that happened in other games and moments across the entire season as well. So really looking forward to this one, mate.
As am I. We got off to a flyer on episode 6 talking about Jordan's first game as a Bull against the Washington Bullets at Chicago Stadium. Yeah, we've got another 81 games left to cover.
Yeah, we'll get through those.
When I mentioned that we have 81 games left to cover, we need to make note of the other fact that there are very minimal games that are actually available on DVD for us to watch and break down. So the episodes that include these games that we actually have copies of will go into more depth on the individual game itself. But then we have stretches of time where we don't have any copies of the game on DVD, and we'll cover off the Bulls game still and also other NBA news of the time.
That's important to make note of, mate. Thank you for that. In this episode, mate, we'll be covering from the 26th of October through to the 9th of November in 1984. It's the first 15 days of the NBA's 39th season. As you mentioned, episode 6 of the series covered MJ's regular season debut exclusively, so check out that episode. All the information's in the show notes, inorlanders.com/NB85-8. Just before we start chatting, mate, about the October 27 Chicago Bulls game, which is the second of their regular season, there was an article that came out on October the 27th, which was titled NBA Preview, taking a look at the 1984-85 season. And it's a great article which gives previews of each team in the league, and it's a very interesting read, so I'll include a copy of that in the show notes. Here's the description for the Chicago Bulls from that article. The Chicago Bulls' long-time problems at centre continue. Dave Corzine would be a fine backup centre, but not as a starter. The acquisition of 7-foot Corbell Jones from the Houston Rockets for Mitchell Wiggins lends talent, defence and experience to the front line, but so much depends on what Jordan brings to the team. So that's just a nice little sampling of what to expect. Check out the show notes to read the entire article. Now, on October the 26th, mate, Charles Barkley made his NBA debut, and he had 11 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, and 1 block in 27 minutes in a 76ers victory over the Cleveland Cavaliers, 111-101. Hakeem Olajuwon, his NBA debut was on October the 27th. He had 24 points and 9 rebounds in Houston's nationally televised victory, 121-111 at Dallas. And the other Hall of Famer from this 1985 NBA season, as far as rookies go, was John Stockton. In his NBA debut, he had 4 points, 5 assists, 2 steals and 2 rebounds in just 17 minutes in a 102-94 loss at Seattle. And I've got a very interesting little tidbit here, mate. His debut was actually almost overshadowed by a local radio station promotion. A guest guesser who predicted the final score of that Jazz and Sonics game would have won $1 million if Stockton had made his last-ditch 3-point shot. Just thought I'd throw that in there for you.
That's a really cool tidbit that I didn't know before.
Yeah, I just thought it was pretty cool. Found it in one of the articles whilst I was researching, and even though the shot wouldn't have actually meant that Utah won the game, if he hadn't made the shot, it would have exactly matched her guess, and she would have won $1 million.
Hindsight is a very handy thing, and we can look back at as to how clutch Stockton was all throughout his NBA career. So that fan, looking back now in 2014, would have been spitting chips that Stockton missed that 3.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Chicago versus Milwaukee, October 27th, 1984.
The Chicago Bulls travelled to Milwaukee, to the Mecca in Wisconsin, and in front of a crowd of 11,052 people, they took on the Bucks in MJ's second regular season contest. Now, the coaches for each team, we had Kevin Lockery, coach of the Bulls, and Milwaukee's then coach was Don Nelson. We have DVDs of this particular game, which has been great to be able to access, and it was a Bulls TV coverage.
The commentator said early on in the game that Jordan was going to have his hands full getting his shots off against Sidney Moncrief. Now, this was a slight contrast to some of the comments that they made a little later on in the first half, which we'll get to a bit later on. It was also right after this comment that Jordan stole the ball from Moncrief and took the ball end-to-end for a sweet reverse layup on Alton Lister and Mike Dunleavy, which the commentators called a dipsy-do, and then, unlike Jim Brinson, enjoyed a replay of the actual shot as opposed to the Lovables.
I love how early on in the episode you've also got a shot in at Jim Brinson as well. So fantastic stuff.
A little bit later on, the commentators mentioned a name, Arnie Harris, which I'm not sure if you recognised that name at all, Adam.
Yeah, I actually do. I've heard that name in numerous telecasts of Bulls TV games over the years from the Jordan era.
Yeah, it definitely made my ears prick up. His name was mentioned after a replay was shown, and Arnie Harris actually often produced games for WGN in the 1990s, and often heard the likes of Wayne Larrivee mention Arnie Harris in the truck. Arnie Harris was a long-time producer-director for the Chicago Cubs, and also did the same for the Bulls during the other 1990s, and he passed away in 2001. So that was a name during the broadcast that pricked my ears up.
Good to hear a Wayne Larrivee mentioned there early too, mate.
The Mecca floor design also greets you when you're watching this game. There's an ESPN 30 for 30 on the gentleman who designed the unique floor for the Bucks, which you see in this game back in 1984, which they again use today at the Bradley Center in 2014. Now, after the enormous amount of criticism that we've brought to everyone's attention in the earlier episodes of this podcast, Dave Corzine hit his first shot. And the other heel issue that he had in the Bulls' first game against Washington didn't appear to be troubling him as much.
Must have healed, mate.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
Quentin Daly was obviously very encouraged by his offensive output in Game 1 against Washington, and subsequently put up 27 field goal attempts in the first quarter of this game in Milwaukee. He came out gunning. The commentators said in the first quarter that MJ was listed at 6'6", but he plays at 6'9".
Oh, that's a good description.
And I mentioned his name before. Dave Corzine was very good early on in the game, very active around the basket with his putbacks, rebounds, and even got to the line a few times. At one point in time, had back-to-back jumpers in the first quarter, so he was off to a good start. And I guess to Dave Corzine's advantage was that the game was in Milwaukee, so no Bulls fans to boo him during the game. Early in the second quarter of this game, MJ did a 1980 version of the move from the 1991 NBA Finals. We're all aware of what the other move is against the other Lakers in Game 2. He went up with a right hand and switched to the left in midair, but he missed the shot. But it was a very spectacular miss, and the commentators loved it. They came out of their chairs when he did it. Then 10 seconds later on the same play, he had a sweet up and under to try to finish the other playoff for the Bulls, which the other commentators were in awe over. Then on the very next play, completely destroyed Sidney Moncrief on a behind-the-head block on a baseline jumper. Don Nelson was extremely displeased with the no call on the play and actually walked out onto the court to remonstrate and to also undoubtedly break up the Bulls' subsequent fast break. Even the commentators made mention of the fact that it was BS that he even did it.
To say that Nelson was displeased is probably understating, and you did say that he remonstrated, but he actually sprinted onto the court. I thought he was going to try and take a charge on Jordan at one stage. It was quite incredible that he could just race out onto the court, and of course he was immediately teed up, but really almost could have been ejected from the game. A very interesting wrinkle from that particular contest. And Sidney Moncrief, of course, one of the great, yet probably underrated players from the 1980s, no doubt. Five-time All-Star, I think, from memory. So Nelson probably thought that he deserved to get a bit more of a veteran call instead of the rookie Jordan getting the benefit of the doubt on one of those great behind-the-head blocks.
And Sidney was playing on Jordan in this game, so he was really under siege early on, because on the very next play, we had the very famous Ennis Watley to Michael Jordan alley-oop with the "Holy Toledo, here it comes, Mr. Jordan is right."
You know what I'm going to do? In always every episode, I want you to do an impression of whoever the commentators are. So you've done very well with episode 6. You did a great impression of Jim Brinson, who was actually more Dick Enberg, and you've done a great one today. So good job, mate. How high did Jordan get up? His hands almost seemed to be equal with the top of the square, the painted square on the backboard. It was ridiculous.
The angle of the other camera shot also, it made him look as though his chest was level with a hoop. That's how high up he looked.
That's one of Jordan's defining highlights throughout his entire career, and it came in just his second game as a rookie.
Just wait until we get to NB92 when I can actually start busting out a Dick Enberg impersonation.
You only got 7 more years to wait, mate, so that's fine.
I noticed that there was lots of really selfish one-on-one basketball by both teams during the game. Just a lot of guys just gunning up shots, not a whole lot of sharing of the ball. The commentators mentioned the heart-stopping play from the previous game when Jeff Rulon put MJ down in Chicago in game 1. Also said that someone on the Bulls should have retaliated, which I found quite interesting to hear, that they thought that one of Jordan's teammates should have had a crack at Jeff Rulon, who is literally built like a brick outhouse.
I'm glad that you mentioned this, because when I was watching that game recently, before we chatted today, I was quite surprised that the commentators made mention of it as well. So clearly they were a bit put off by the fact that Rulon decked Jordan on his way to the hoop, and they clearly made mention of it in this game.
I mentioned earlier on that there was a slight contrast in some of the comments about Michael Jordan and Sidney Moncrief a little later on in the game. And it was a little later on in the second quarter that Sidney Moncrief was looking a little tired. And the commentators even made mention of this as well. He was sucking a bit of wind, I think, having tried to chase the other second game rookie around the court.
Sidney obviously had his work cut out for him in this game.
Another thing that was interesting was Dick Bavetta, who actually recently retired in 2014, was one of the officials calling the game. He had his trademark bald patch, but in 1984 it was surrounded by brown hair instead of grey.
Oh, I'm not going to say too much, mate, because I am balding at a rate of knots, so I empathise with Mr. Bavetta.
And to add insult to injury, on the very next play, the Bulls had a 3-on-1 fast break, which finished in an Ennis Watley alley-oop to Michael Jordan, who subsequently dunked two-handed on Sidney Moncrief, which was an awesome play. Straight after the play, Moncrief was smiling. He must have wondered who the hell this Jordan kid was.
Not only that, he must have actually thought, when was the fourth quarter buzzer going to sound, because he was in for a very long night, although it was a very close game, which we'll get to in a few minutes.
Alton Lister must be right up there in the list of players who have been dunked on the most in NBA history. MJ drove the lane, hung, and then dumped off to Orlando Woolridge, who dunked on Alton Lister with a spectacular two-handed dunk. And I guess when you mention dunks on Alton Lister, you immediately have to go to Sean Kemp's effort on him in the 1992 playoffs, Adam.
I would have been disappointed had you not mentioned the Rayman's jam on Lister. Alton Lister, of course, would like to be known more than just being dunked on by Sean Kemp. However, unfortunately, a lot of people do remember that play. It was an incredible jam by the Rayman. The
term volume shooter is one that's come to prominence in the last 10 to 15 years with guys like Kobe Bryant and Allen Iverson. Quentin Daly of the Bulls definitely showed that he was a volume shooter and gave his teammates plenty of offensive rebound opportunities.
A very polite way of saying that he was jacking up shots left, right and centre.
And then with just over a minute to go and the Bulls were down by 2, Sidney Moncrief got blocked by Orlando Woolridge. The loose ball ended up with Jordan, who goes all alone to the other end for the two-hand rock the cradle, which is featured on Come Fly With Me, which also tied the game. And again, the camera angle, it makes it look like MJ is halfway to the ceiling.
Jordan had an incredible amount of amazing dunks in his career, and that's certainly right up there with the best of them.
And it was at this point that the feed of the DVD that you sent me, Adam, or allegedly sent me, was
thank you,
broken up by a 10-second clip of I'm So Excited by the Pointer Sisters.
You can't actually even make that up. That's seriously what has happened. Whoever was recording the game at the time on VHS obviously changed channels for a little while. Not sure if they were thinking correctly to change channels just after a play like that from Jordan, but yep, they started recording something else for a few seconds and then it came back to the game, which was drawing to its close. So quite amusing to say the least.
Well, it was very fitting because at that point in time, I was so excited. And also the other Pointer Sisters were used by Nike to lure MJ to his first contract with the company as well. So it was kind of fitting.
Absolutely. So it was obviously meant to be, I guess, in a way.
You mentioned earlier on that it ended up being a very close game, and in an Air Jordan ad in 1997, I believe it was for the Air Jordan 12, he said that he was trusted with taking the game-winning shot 26 times and missed. And one of those 26 missed game winners happened in this game.
Yeah, it did, mate. In the closing seconds, had a chance to force OT. The Bulls were down by 2 and Jordan went for a short pull-up, but unfortunately came up short. The Bulls actually gave this game away. Milwaukee trailed 89-75 with just over 9 minutes to go in the game. So it was disappointing for Chicago to give up such a big lead to then actually lose the contest. The final score was 108-106. The Bulls dropped to 1-1 on the season. Orlando Woolridge led the Bulls with 29 points. Sidney Green had 10 rebounds and Ennis Watley had 11 assists. Jordan's final stat line was 21 points, 5 rebounds and 5 assists. Terry Cummings had 34 points for the Bucks, including 14 of the team's last 16 points, and the aforementioned Alton Lister had 12 rebounds.
Milwaukee versus Chicago, October 29, 1984.
The Bulls returned home to complete the home-and-home series and hosted the Bucks this time back at Chicago Stadium. The crowd on hand was a lowly 9,356.
Wow.
So it's quite surprising. Again, they were sub 10,000. But the crowd that were there in attendance were in for an absolute treat, as we're about to discuss.
At last, we had Johnny Redker and Bill Hazen on the call for Sports Vision, who were the broadcasting station of the time. Quinton Daly was named unavailable due to illness, and I put the illness in inverted commas in my notes. There was an article that appeared on the 31st of October entitled "Chicago Calls Daly for Walking." Now, Quinton Daly's off-court issues are now well known, and we actually spoke to Sam Smith about this in episode 7.
Daly, we suspected when he came because, he had to get into the draft, he had to agree to plead on a assault charge on a student nurse. So, without narrowing it down, I believe he was the only player in NBA history who was picketed on opening day by the National Organization for Women. Quentin had a lot of problems, but that season we didn't see him particularly till the next couple of years. And the next season too, we didn't realize the serious drugs they were into.
This is NB85.
One of the things that I noticed during this game was a gentleman who sat behind the Chicago Bulls bench and still does up to this day, a man by the name of John Capps, who is still now the director of Bull Security. He's a man that I actually had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago, Adam.
Oh, nice one. How did that come about?
After a game, we met up with Bill Wennington, who took us down into the Bulls locker room, and then on our way out, I caught a glimpse of Mr. Capps, who was sitting down in one of the rooms on the way out of the UC, and he's like a piece of furniture behind the Bulls bench, pretty much every Bulls game that I've ever seen. So as soon as I saw him, I recognised him and made a point to go over and introduce myself to him.
Good stuff, mate. Given he's part of the Bull security, I actually just would have thought that he would have been escorting you from the building after you tried to interact with Bill Wennington.
Stalker is a word that's been used, but my therapist says that I can talk about it again now, so it's okay.
Oh, dear. Let's move on to the game, mate. On the Bucks' first possession, Alton Lister, we've mentioned him again already, he went for a sweeping hook shot, but missed. All the same, it did look awesome, and it just reminded me of what a bygone era that low post move was. Back in 85, it was pretty much stock standard amongst some of the bigs, of course, most notably Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but great to see the hook shot in the first 15 seconds of the Bucks' offense.
I did notice in these first two games that a few of the Milwaukee big guys actually threw up the other jump hook, and obviously Kareem's sky hook was one of the most unstoppable shots of the era, so definitely a noticeable play that the big men went to.
Now, on a transition break, later in that first quarter, MJ went up and switched to the left hand in the lane on a really athletic move, but surprisingly, great defense from Terry Cummings actually swatted him out of bounds. That was a particularly great move from Cummings to anticipate MJ going to his left hand. With the scores tied at 6, Jordan was in the triple threat position and he put a move on 3 Bucks defenders, went baseline and hit on a gorgeous left-hand layup. One other thing I noticed in the first quarter, MJ reacted quite badly to a call that went against him. He pulled out what I've described as a in-game jump man.
Yeah, it was. It really was an in-game jump man.
Like the ref was literally 2 metres away looking at Jordan. He remonstrates quite demonstratively, yet wasn't actually teed up. So I was surprised that the Bucks didn't have somebody heading to the free throw line.
You mentioned the word gorgeous before when describing Jordan's gorgeous left-hand layup. Almost as gorgeous was when a fan favourite, Dave Corzine, checked in with what can only be described as an awesome T-shirt tan line on his arms.
Oh, dear. Well, as a fellow Casper the Ghost white man, I can only applaud him on those subsequent tan lines, mate.
He definitely enjoyed the other summertime in Chicago. With Quentin Daly out of this game, Wes Matthews saw first quarter action. Red Kerr mentioned that he caught onto the Bulls offense very quickly, and I actually wondered if the Bulls offense that he caught on too quickly was the get the ball to Michael and get out of the way offense. But he actually had a great game at both ends of the floor in this one. He played his basketball with a lot of intensity, and as we say here in Australia, a bit of mongrel about him. And in Jeff Perlman's book, Showtime, about the 80s LA Lakers, he actually mentioned this trait from when Wes was a Laker in the other 1980s. He played with a bit of a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, I like that description. And Wes Matthews actually was only signed as a free agent with the Bulls on October the 26th, on the day of the Bulls season opener. He was actually signed and actually got a couple of minutes that night. Little tidbit for you there, mate.
In the second quarter, Bill Hazen made mention that Sports Division were to, and I quote, have the Bulls all over the league, which was referring to them broadcasting all of their games. And it's just a pity that we actually don't have access to hardly any of them in 2014.
It's a case of what may have been and hopefully in the future what may be still. But as I did mention in our chat with Sam Smith, as far as I'm aware, within the trading community, less than 1/3 of MJ's rookie season games actually exist on VHS or DVD.
Dave Corzine had a nightmare sequence which began with a drop pass from MJ, and then he fouled Paul McKeskey on the very next play. And you can imagine the noise that came from the Bulls fans.
Oh, I tell you what, I really want to get to the point where we actually have some great things to chat about in relation to Dave Corzine's play, and we'd love to get him on the podcast in a future episode of the show. So we'll do what we can to endeavour to make that happen, mate.
Hazen said that the Bulls had changed from a horizontal team to a vertical team since the 1984 season after an MJ fast break dunk, which I found funny.
That's strange, but yeah, I guess that makes sense.
If I had been a Bulls fan back in 1984, I think that Steve Johnson would have been a guy that would have been a bit of a favourite of mine. And just from the few games that I've seen of him, he kind of comes across as a bit of a poor man's Horace Grant. Very active, great on the boards and around the hoop.
Yeah, that's a good description there, mate. Now that you actually mention it, I hadn't thought of it previously, but it makes perfect sense.
There was a shot of 2 smiling fans who were enjoying the other game at Chicago Stadium, to which Bill Hazen said there had been more smiles than last season, which was a challenging year for everyone, including the announcers.
I love how...
That's how bad they were. That's how bad the Bulls were the year before.
It's funny how some of these commentators are openly admitting to certain things which you might think they'd actually just bite their lip and not actually make mention of.
There was a play late in the second quarter when Dave Corzine was stripped down low and the ball went out of bounds, which again drew boos from the Chicago fans.
Poor Dave.
I actually then took the time, I looked to see if maybe Corzine's middle name was Luke, to help explain the noise that the crowd was making when he touched the ball. But unfortunately for him, his middle name is John.
Good one. I like that. Shout out to Luke Longley, former guest of the podcast too.
Luke.
Yeah, great stuff. Always got to get the Australian mentions in when we can, mate, especially a great guy like Luke Longley.
We actually took the time out when we spoke to Sam Smith in episode number 7 about this criticism that Dave Corzine received from the Bulls fans on a regular basis, and this is what he had to say.
I interviewed Dave for the book. He was traded for, I think it was Artis Gilmore. And so Gilmore, if I remember it right, I mean, obviously, I remember Gilmore, who is, he's in the Hall of Fame, tremendously popular. It's sort of the reverse racism. Gilmore is the black player. He's much more popular and effective. And a white center comes in. They also got a Mark Oberding in that trade, another, white forward, but they're clumsy and slow. And when the Bulls had a couple of good years, they had a great team in the early 70s. It went down, and then they got Gilmore out of the ABA, and they had a couple of good years. And Gilmore had become a really popular player. And now he's traded for Corzine. They didn't do anything as a player. Always a very mild-mannered, pleasant guy, and an effective player, good outside shooter. Played a high post player, but nowhere near the talent of Gilmore, who I think made 4 All-Star teams in the 6 years he was with the Bulls. The community just simply turned on Dave for not being Artis Gilmore. It was tough on him. It was really unpleasant, and he didn't show it. You can't fight City Hall as a cliche, or can't fight the public. It was hard for him, but he stuck with with that team a long time. He got almost when they started making their move in the late '80s. He was integral to Jordan's success in a lot of ways, because by playing as an outside center, if Artis Gilmore was with the Bulls, Jordan, he still been great, but he wouldn't have had all that room in the lane because, big centers. That's why Kobe had to defer to Shaq for so long, because you can't go inside because the center, they're going to throw the ball to the center. But when they traded Gilmore for Corzine, and that was before Krause came and before Reinsdorf took over, you cleared out the middle. So when Jordan came in, the middle was open to drive all the time, and that's really where he made his reputation doing that. So, in a way, the creation of Jordan was in part due to the way Dave Corzine played. Fans didn't look at it that way.
This is NB85.
The Bucks ended the first half. They were up by 1 point. It was 54-53, and we'd be in for an entertaining second half, to say the least.
Early in the third quarter, MJ missed 2 really tough circus shots. The second one was so spectacular that they replayed the miss.
That says a lot.
There were empty seats aplenty at Chicago Stadium during this game, directly behind each basket, where you currently find 100 level floor seating at the United Center. There was hardly any seats at all and a lot of empty space. I figured that they thought, if no one's going to be sitting there, why bother setting up the seats? It was really, really noticeable. I tweeted out a photo of Orlando Woolridge at the line from this game. The cameraman who took the shot is underneath the basket that Orlando's shooting on, and you can see the empty red seats at the other end of the court, not just on the floor level seats or the few seats that were actually there, but also on level 1 as well. It's just a sea of red empty seats.
After 3 quarters, the Bucks were up by 9 points. They extended their lead. It was 85-76, and we were in for an absolute treat in the fourth quarter. The Bulls went on an offensive tear, mostly in large part thanks to one Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
Then early in the fourth, fan and podcast favourite Dave Corzine made 2 free throws and actually got cheers from the crowd, which I actually blacked out for a moment after that happened.
So did he, probably at the line.
Sidney Moncrief really redeemed himself from the other previous game when Jordan ran him ragged at the Mecca with a great fourth quarter on the offensive end in this game.
There was a great battle in that last quarter involving Moncrief, Terry Cummings and Michael Jordan. It was very exciting to watch.
It was literally about halfway through the fourth quarter of this game that Jordan really took over the game. He deflected a Sidney Moncrief pass and went end-to-end for an M1 layup, which started a string of 3-point plays for him in this game. It was at this point that he really took over at both ends and played the point for a majority of the end of the game. After this, Alton Lister missed a putback dunk attempt, which would look cool in itself, but it actually led to a Chicago Bulls fast break and an N1 scoop at the hoop for Jordan, who was no less surrounded by 3 Milwaukee Bucks. And in my notes here, I've got written that the crowd went ape droppings.
Yeah, they did. There was numerous plays where the crowd went absolutely berserk, but I'm pretty sure the one you're referring to is that when he actually then sort of crouches down and just starts doing his fist pump?
Go the fist pump. Yeah. And then on the very next possession, ran the point, took the ball from the other top of the key down the paint for another M1 driving layup with about 31 seconds left. And the crowd and the commentators were just beside themselves. Red Kerr's enthusiasm calling the game was awesome, not just on Bulls plays like the numerous ones that Jordan rounded out the game with, but on all plays. At times he was even yelling when calling the game. It was really, really cool to watch.
And that's one of the great things about Red Kerr. Like, obviously we know that he was an extreme homer in terms of wanting the Bulls to get up and win, and then especially during the Jordan era, he was absolutely the man linked to Jordan as far as his commentating career goes. So it's great to hear some vintage commentary from the late, great Johnny Red Kerr. Chicago had a 40-point last quarter and won the game 116-110. They moved to 2-1 on the season. Orlando Woolridge was quoted in an article which is titled "Rookie Jordan Sparks Bulls," and he makes a great comment here, which I really think can sum up Jordan's impact on all his teammates across his entire career. And he said, "There's a kind of magic in his ability to turn a game around and to instill in his teammates a desire to excel." And to follow that up, MJ was also quoted as saying, and this is a fantastic thing as well, "I became charged up emotionally late in the game because I know how important it is for the team to win in Chicago and to get rid of the boo birds," which I think was obviously on point given the fact that, as we've mentioned, Dave Corzine was at the head of the list in terms of the booing fans.
And the way that MJ finished off this game was just ridiculous. The way that he was just taking the ball to the hoop repeatedly and getting the and ones. He was also terrific on the defensive end in the fourth quarter. As Orlando mentioned, really turned the game around all by himself.
Oh, it's fantastic. We'll get to some of the stat lines in just a moment, but another article that I must make mention of, it had an awesome introductory paragraph. The article is titled, "Rookie Jordan Takes Control in Second Half to Ignite Bulls." It reads, "Some wild animals were caged in a parking lot adjacent to Chicago Stadium awaiting the opening of the circus Monday night, while Michael Jordan ran wild over the Milwaukee Bucks inside the stadium." And I thought that was absolutely fantastic.
That's terrific.
That's a very apt description, and I had to make mention of that. MJ finished the game with 37 points, and this is just his third regular season game. He had 22 points in the fourth quarter, along with 4 rebounds and 5 assists in the game. The Bulls trailed by 6 with less than 5 minutes to play, and then MJ scored 13 of the team's last 17 points. And in that fourth quarter, Jordan also broke Bob Love's 1973 club record of 21 points in a quarter.
In his third game.
Yep, incredible. Now for the Bucks, Sidney Moncrief had 28 points and Terry Cummings had 26 points. And future Bull Craig Hodges would have 12 points for Milwaukee.
And his jump shot was on point during this game as well.
You could just see how important of a player he was for whatever team that he found a good fit on, and at the time was with the Bucks. Here is what Sam had to say about the second and third game of MJ's rookie season.
They went up to Milwaukee, and he had a chance right at the end of the game to win the game and shoots an air ball. And that was the confidence. He came back. Then they played Milwaukee again at home, the game after that, and won the game. Had like some 20-point quarter or something, drives them back. And I remember Don Nelson saying at the time, and they were known as a great defensive team. They had Sidney Moncrief, Paul Pressey. They had the best wing defenders, shooting guard, small forward defenders in the league. And Nelson was a defensive-oriented coach back then, and hard to believe the way he became in Golden State. And he said, we put all of them on him. And he said, not one of them could guard him. And these were the best defensive players in the league. These are the guys who were winning Defensive Player of the Year, Moncrief had. And Jordan had like 19 or 20 points in the quarter and rallied the Bulls to win. And so it showed right away a couple of things, not only what he could do, but the confidence to come back from shooting an air ball with a chance to win the game to coming back, dominating the very next game.
This is NB85.
Now, after this game, mate, article that I just referred to alludes to this. The Bulls have to travel on road trips because the circus actually does come to Chicago, and that means the Bulls can't play their games at the Chicago Stadium. And we'll cover the results of the first 4 of those games in this episode. Now, on October 30, there was an article titled NBA No-Shows Would Have a Powerful Team. And in the article, Coach Frank Layden of the Utah Jazz, he discusses the notables who are not yet signed with any NBA teams. And the players mentioned include Maurice Lucas, Joe Barry Carroll, David Greenwood of the Bulls, John Long, and the Jazz's own Adrian Dantley. And it's worth mentioning this quote from Layden because I'll follow up with a bit more on this a bit later. He said, Adrian isn't just walking in here and taking someone else's place on the roster and starting to play immediately. No one guy is bigger than the Jazz. So just remember that quote, mate, when we get to a bit later in the episode. On October the 30th as well, the Bulls played their fourth game. It was a 109-104 victory over the Kansas City Kings at Kemper Arena in Missouri in front of a crowd of 9,391. Now, the Bulls went to 3-1 on the season. MJ had 25 points, didn't shoot all that well. He was 8 for 21 from the field, but made all 9 of his free throws. He had 4 rebounds and 5 assists. Ennis Watley secured the win with a steal with 46 seconds remaining in the fourth quarter, and the Kings were down by 3 at the time. For the Kings, Eddie Johnson, former podcast guest, 24 points. And in an article which is titled Jordan Leads Chicago, it said, and this is inconsequential to the game we just talked about, but it had a little in other news and says, a $28,000 BMW stolen from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's driveway was found torched and dumped down a cliff in the Santa Monica Mountains, police said. So there you go, mate.
I'm looking forward to the ridiculous amount of useless NBA news from the 84-85 season right throughout this podcast from you, Adam.
I do what I can, mate. I do what I can. October 31st, the Boston Celtics hosted the New Jersey Nets, and before the game, Commissioner David Stern was on hand, and he presented Boston with their 1984 championship rings.
His first ever crack at presenting the championship rings for the previous year's NBA champion.
Correct. That rounds out October of 1984. We've got some more things to chat about from November, though, mate. On November the 1st, mate, the Denver Nuggets were 16-point winners over the Chicago Bulls. It was a 129-113 thumping, basically. It was at McNichols Sports Arena, one of my favourite courts from the 1980s in Denver, Colorado, in front of a crowd of just 9,413 people. The Bulls dropped to 3-2 on the season. Quentin Daly, as you mentioned earlier, loved to jack up the shots. He had a great night this time, though, 26 points. And Orlando Ruiz had 24 points. MJ shot 7 of 15 from the field for 17 points, but in one of the articles I read, it said that he was held admirably by T.R. Dunn. Calvin Nat from Denver had 31 points.
This is one of those games that we don't have a copy of to watch, but it's also one of the games that there's a photograph from that we've seen in the research for the podcast, Adam.
Absolutely, mate. And as always, that will be in the ever-reliable show notes, so definitely check that out on the website. Another game that took place on November the 1st, a 3-overtime affair between the Phoenix Suns and the Portland Trailblazers. The Suns hung on to win eventually, 139-130. Some more information here. November the 2nd, Seattle took on the Utah Jazz, and the crowd was less than 4,000 people, but they played the game at the Thomas & Mack Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, I tried to find out why a Seattle-Utah game was played in Las Vegas. I'm thinking it must have had to do with the scheduling, but for whatever reason, they had a very ordinary crowd, and those in attendance did actually get to see Darryl Griffith's then career-high 41 points. So Dr. Duncanstein put on an absolute clinic, but not many people were there to see it, mate.
One of the cool nicknames, Dr. Duncanstein.
Fantastic, isn't it? Basically, I wanted to say Dr. Duncanstein, so that's why it's worth mentioning. Again, on November the 2nd, in their 107-103 victory at home to the Dallas Mavericks, Philadelphia coach Billy Cunningham racked up his 400th win as a coach, and he actually achieved that faster than any coach to that point in NBA history in just 572 games. On the 3rd of November, mate, New Jersey's Mike Jaminski, so the G-Man, hit a game-winning 18-foot jumper at the buzzer in a 118-117 home win over the Indiana Pacers. An interesting article, mate, that I'm sure you'll enjoy. November the 6th, it's titled, Theus Free are at odds with new coaches. Who would have thought that? Now, the players at Kansas City and Cleveland, respectively, were quoted with the following gems. First, Reggie Theus said of his coach, Jack McKinney, I want to feel like you can make a mistake without it being a cardinal sin. If that's the way it is, you may as well sit me down. So that was a good start. And disgruntled World Be Free said of his then Cavaliers coach, George Karl, I will not become just a passer and a cutter. This franchise was nothing, and I made it something. So that's good to hear less than 2 weeks into the NBA season for those coaches.
Both guys speaking like they were Hall of Famers, but were actually more along the lines of Hall of Fame pain in the necks.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, who'd want to be an NBA head coach, really? Some of the things you've got to put up with, obviously they're remunerated quite well, goes without saying, I guess, but boy, putting up with some of the personalities and egos must have been a nightmare for some of these guys.
Reggie Theus was also probably a little salty about getting the Khyber from the other Bulls as well.
Oh, there's no doubt that would have played a huge part in what he was saying there, I'm sure. He probably had nothing to lose, so he just thought he would say what he wants. Also on November the 6th, speaking of some useless information, mate, to make room for Earl Jones, who was activated from the Lakers injured list, LA placed Chuck Nevitt, the then tallest player in NBA history at 7'5", on waivers.
Chucky Nevitt's a personal favourite of both yours and mine.
Oh, no doubt.
And I wasn't aware of the fact that James Earl Jones ever played for the Lakers.
On November the 7th, mate, the Bulls, after a 6-day break, I did mention they had to leave the Chicago area so the circus could come to town, but they didn't play any games in the interim until November the 7th. And in a very memorable contest, which we'll be chatting about in much more depth in episode 9 of this series, Chicago were 122-118 victors over the Detroit Pistons at the Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, in front of a crowd of 15,542. The Bulls went to 4-2 on the season.
One of the 82 games that Jordan played in his rookie season that we have the full copy of, and yeah, we'll break down to within an inch of its life.
I can't wait, to be honest. And a couple of the stat lines from this game. Quentin Daly again lit up the scoring column, 29 points. MJ was 9 of 19 from the field, had 25 points, all of which were in the second half, incredibly. For the Pistons, Isaiah Thomas, and this was their first professional meeting, Jordan versus Thomas. Zeke had 35 points. In the game, he also passed his 5,000th career point. He had 10 assists as well. Kelly Tripucka had 29 points, and Billy Laimbeer, 17 points and 12 rebounds. And there's an article which is titled, Detroit Caught the Michael Jordan Show Thursday, and in it says, Jordan electrified the crowd with 9 points in 3 minutes, including 3 dunks. And as I mentioned, episode 9, we're going to break down the game because we do have access to it on DVD, and he put on an absolute clinic in terms of some incredible highlights. It's worth mentioning as well, November the 7th, Darryl Dawkins of the New Jersey Nets was placed on the injured reserve list. He'd been out of action since the second game of the season with back spasms. In another article from November the 7th, which is titled Odds and Ends, Offbeat Stats of the National Basketball Association, it's a fantastic article. I won't elaborate any further other than to say it's in the show notes, and it's an absolute must-read for heaps of quirky NBA stats.
Harvey Pollack, one of the only guys who's a statistician for a team who's almost a household name for NBA fans.
Yep, and he gets mentioned in this article quite often, so it's a really great read, so I definitely encourage you to check that out. November the 8th, mate, MJ's first trip to Madison Square Garden in the regular season. It was an absolute beauty. The Bulls were 121-106 victors over the New York Knicks in front of a crowd of 19,252. The Bulls improved to 5-2 on the season. MJ tore it up. He had 33 points and 8 boards. For the Knicks, the great Bernard King had 34 points. And I encourage you as well to look at the YouTube clip, which will be in the show notes, which has a new, in inverted commas, angle of MJ's highlights from this game. It's from the vantage point of the cameraman on the baseline, and there's some phenomenal footage of MJ hitting on a absolute whirling dervish of moves.
That's incredible. I was about to start the episode off with these words, but I'll use them now. I love the internet.
I love it too, mate. I love it too.
It's ridiculous.
It is. Now, I mentioned earlier a comment that Frank Layden made about Adrian Dantley, should he actually sign with the Jazz. On November the 8th, Adrian Dantley signed with the Jazz after initially holding out. He led the NBA in scoring in 1984, and the very next day he scored 33 points for the Utah Jazz against the Golden State Warriors. So much for Frank Layden saying that no one's bigger than the team. They signed Dantley, and immediately he played, and the very next day scored 30+.
And then Dantley went and finished 7th in the NBA at 26.6 points per game. Well done, Frank.
Yeah, that's right. Now, mate, one thing that I'm not sure if we even had chatted about previously to recording today, November the 9th, the last day of the span that we're chatting about in this episode, a very, very famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, moment in NBA history. Philadelphia at Boston. With 1 minute and 38 seconds remaining in the third quarter, Larry Bird and Dr. J got into a massive fight.
Was this the footage of a couple of the 76ers players holding Larry Bird's arms as Dr. J used him as a punching bag?
Yes, that's the game. And incredibly, there's a couple of incredible things from this. I'm not trying to go over the top. I am prone to do this. Larry Bird had 42 points at the time he got ejected, and we're talking late third quarter. Dr. J, conversely, no pun intended on the fact that he was actually a Converse shoe wearer,
Nice.
had 6 points at the time.
So Larry was really sticking it to him, and the doctor obviously took exception to it and or something else that Larry did during the game. Larry actually finished that season averaging almost 29 points per game. So, of course, this is in the middle of the 3-year MVP run that he had.
Absolute purple patch and then some. Now, the other incredible thing is that neither player was suspended in the fallout to this game. They were both fined $7,500 apiece. There was about 15 other players involved in the scuffle / melee / whatever you want to call it. In the show notes of this episode, I'll include a link to the fight. Who knows how long it'll actually stay online, because the NBA tend to remove most uploads of this particular fight for some reason. But anyhow, it'll be in the links to the show for as long as it's online. So a really incredible moment. The Celtics won the game 130-119, but that was overshadowed by the fact that two of the icons of the NBA were in a very heated fight. Bird initiated it, but then Dr. J took it to a new level when he started to retaliate and just started punching Larry like there was no tomorrow.
1987 playoffs, another example of this is when Robert Parrish...
That's right. He mugged Lambier.
He didn't mug him. He blatantly slugged Lambier. Jess Kersey, the ref, was standing right there in front of him and didn't call anything.
No, and that was Parrish's retaliation from a play, I think, earlier in the series as well. They just thought that Lambier was owed.
Yeah, I also think that it was a build-up to the amount of dirty play that Lambier himself had executed during that season. I think that even Jess Kersey had seen enough and wanted to see him straightened out, which the other chief did.
He did a very fine job of that. And, incredible that Parrish wasn't even... I don't even think he was called for the foul, was he, as you said?
No.
He should have been ejected and probably suspended, but nothing doing.
In 2014, that's a 50-game suspension and several zillion dollars worth in fines.
Absolutely. Now, from the period of time that we're chatting about, mate, the NBA only had one NBA Player of the Week announcement. It was on November the 4th, and Larry Nance of the Phoenix Suns was named that Player of the Week. He averaged 20.2 points per game on 60.3% shooting from the field. I think it also helped that Phoenix won their first 5 games. And on November the 1st, Nance had a then career high of 44 points along with 11 rebounds. But perhaps most stunningly, his very next game, he had 0. Donut King.
I was actually just about to say, when you do the maths, 20 points per game in 5 games is around 101 points. You take away that 44 points and he had 60 points in 4 games. But obviously that career high 44 was that good.
That's what I was quite stunned about. Like, if we work out, and I'm sure you could probably do it through the Great Basketball Reference website, but to work out the biggest differential between scoring one night compared to your very next game, he had a 44-point difference, going from 44 points to zip. Incredible stat. So it'd be interesting to know if that's the all-time record from one game to the next.
I'd like to see what Wilt had after his 100-point game, because he might have really let himself down with a 50-point game and had a 50-point differential.
That's true. You put me to shame there. Wilt only had 54 the next game, so he would have usurped Larry Nance.
For shame, Wilt.
Usurped. Wow, that came out of nowhere. Didn't it? Now, a couple other quick notes, mate, before we actually wrap this bad boy up. Let's go through some of the highs that happened in that period of time we're chatting about in this episode. The high man in terms of points was Kiki Vandeweghe of the Portland Trailblazers, one of my favourite players from the 1980s. 47 points in a victory at Kansas City on the 27th of October. He was 19 of 23 from the field and perfect 9 from 9 from the free throw line. What a great performance, and he was very unlucky not to probably get the Player of the Week nod ahead of Larry Nance, to be honest. Rebounding, Artis Gilmore for the San Antonio Spurs had 21 rebounds against the LA Lakers, also on the 27th of October. And the leading assist man was Gerald Henderson from Seattle, who had...
Henderson steals the ball!
Thank you very much, Johnny Most. He had 20 assists versus the LA Lakers as well on a November 1 meeting at Seattle, mate.
Just when Dave Corzine's week couldn't get any worse, Artis goes out and has 21 boards against the LA Lakers. I'm sure that would have really, in the words of Tom Waddle, chapped the saddle regions of many Bulls fans.
Oh, man. What can we say? Hopefully we find some great games in this 85 season where Dave actually does stand out for the right reasons, because he was a great journeyman for the Bulls and didn't deserve a majority of the boo birds that were heading his direction. Now, just to finish off with the NBA standings through November 9, courtesy of Basketball Reference, as a lot of these stats have been. Thank you very much to those great people behind Basketball Reference. The division leaders in the Atlantic Division, the Celtics were 5-0, undefeated. The Central Division, Milwaukee Bucks were 6-1. In the Midwest, the Houston Rockets were also undefeated, 6-0 at the time. So Boston and Houston were the only undefeated teams at this time. In the Pacific, the Suns were off to a flyer, 6-1. For what it's worth, the Chicago Bulls were 5-2, and it was their best start in 11 years. Unfortunately for Cleveland, they were the NBA's only winless team, having gone 0-7. That pretty much wraps it up, mate. So is there anything else you'd like to talk about in this period of time? I've really enjoyed just chatting about not only the Bulls and MJ, but just the wealth of things that happened in just this first 15-day span of the NBA season in 1985.
NB Giddy Up.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter at inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.